Hare Lord Premanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tojayam Udiraye Nasta Preshvabhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Utama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. Reading this morning from the third canto, chapter 26, text number 9. Okay, let's go ahead and do that one in full. Start, okay? Yeah. Devahutir Uvacha Prakrite Purushasyapi Lakshanam Purushottamam Ruhi Karnayorasya Sada Satcha Yad Atmakam Prakrite Purushasyapi Lakshanam Purushottamam Ruhi Karnayorasya Sada Satcha Yad Atmakam. Let's chant. Devahutir Vacha Prakrite Purushasyapi Lakshanam Purushottamam Ruhi Karnayorasya Sada Satcha Yad Atmakam. Prakrite Purushasyapi Purushottamam Ruhi Karnayorasya. Anyone else? Prakrite Purushasyapi Lakshanam Purushottamam Ruhi Karnayorasya Sada Satcha Atmakam. Synonyms together, please. Devahutir Uvacha. Devahuti said, Prakrite, of his energies, Purushasya, of the Supreme Person, Api, also, Lakshanam, characteristics, Purushottama, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, Ruhi, kindly explain, Karanaya, causes, Asya, of this creation, Sadasat, manifest and unmanifest, Cha, and Yat Atmakam, consisting of which, translation together, please. Devahuti said, personality of Godhead, kindly explain the characteristics of the Supreme Person and his energies, for both of those are causes manifest and unmanifest creation. This is a chapter entitled Fundamental Principles of Material Nature. And it can be a real snoozer if you're not careful. But I'm going to try to explain this morning some of the topics here in very foundational ways. So who'd like to read the purport so we can get started? So sleepy here this weekend. Please, Bruce, go right ahead.
Prakriti, or material nature, is connected with both the Supreme Lord and the living entities, just as a woman is connected with her husband as a wife and with her children as a mother. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that he impregnates Mother Nature with children, living entities, and thereafter all species of living entities become manifest. The relationship of all living entities with material nature has been explained. Now, an understanding of the relationship between material nature and the Supreme Lord is sought by Devahuti. The product of that relationship is stated to be the manifest and unmanifest material world. The unmanifest material world is the subtle Mahat Tattva, and from that Mahat Tattva, the material manifestation has emerged.
Okay, let's pause just a moment here. So the unmanifested aggregate of all the material energies is called the Mahat Tattva. And then from the Mahat Tattva, the material world is produced. So this Sarga and Visarga, manifest, unmanifest creation, is first principle to understand. God creates energies, then he puts them together. Where he has his people put them together.
So what's Pancha Tattva?
Tattva means truth. So Pancha Tattva is Lord Chaitanya and his 5 features. His 5 truths. Devotee, the incarnation of a devotee. Anyway, the 5. And then the Mahat Tattva is this great material energy. So it only exists in the material world. That's all the ingredients of the material world. Just as an artist might have paints and brushes, so the Lord makes all the energies separately. Now, in this morning, we'll go through these different categories of energies that comprise the Mahat Tattva. Please, go ahead, Bruce.
In the Vedic literatures, it is said that by the glance of the Supreme Lord, the total material energy is impregnated, and then everything is born of material nature. It is also confirmed in the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita that under his glance, Adyakshena, under his direction and by his will, nature is working. It is not that nature works blindly. After understanding the position of the conditioned souls in relation to material nature, Devahuti wanted to know how nature works under the direction of the Lord and what the relationship is between the material nature and the Lord. In other words, she wanted to learn the characteristics of the Supreme Lord in relation to the material nature.
Please, get one.
The relationship of the living entities with matter and that of the Supreme Lord with matter are certainly not on the same level, although the Mayavadis may interpret it in that way. When it is said that the living entities are bewildered, the Mayavadi philosophers ascribe this bewilderment to the Supreme Lord. But that is not applicable. The Lord is never bewildered. That is the difference between the personalists and impersonalists. Devahuti is not unintelligent. She has enough intelligence to understand that the living entities are not on the level of the Supreme Lord. Because the living entities are infinitesimal, they become bewildered or conditioned by material nature. But this does not mean that the Supreme Lord is also conditioned or bewildered. The difference between the conditioned soul and the Lord is that the Lord is the Lord, the master of material nature, and he is therefore not subject to its control. He is controlled neither by spiritual nature nor by material nature. He is the supreme controller himself, and he cannot be compared to the ordinary living entities, who are controlled by the laws of material nature. 2 words used in this verse are Sat and Asat. The cosmic manifestation is Asat. It does not exist, but the material energy of the Supreme Lord is Sat, or ever existing. Material nature is ever existing in its subtle form as the energy of the Lord, but it sometimes manifests this non-existent or temporarily existent nature, the cosmos. An analogy may be made with the father and the mother. The mother and the father exist, but sometimes the mother begets children. Similarly, this cosmic manifestation, which comes from the unmanifest material of the Supreme Lord, sometimes appears and again disappears. But the material nature is never but the material nature is ever existing. And the Lord is the supreme cause for both the subtle and gross manifestations of this material world.
Okay, John. So Devahuti is asking this question, and we might ask, why is it such a technical question? She is beginning in this conversation. But in many places in Srimad Bhagavatam, we find this conversations and sections begin with technical descriptions. And they're the kind of sections that we might kind of skip over. Yet it's helpful for our spiritual life to know that there is a solid philosophy and rationale behind Krishna consciousness, which is otherwise so esoteric to people in general. But there's so much information. So we'll talk more about that. But so Devahuti is asking this question: what is the relationship between God and material nature? And then her son Kapila Dev, who is Krishna himself, then answers in the following 6 or 7 verses. So let's read his answers and then we'll discuss. We'll just start with the ladies' side. Just pass the mics around, please. Starting with 10.
The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "The unmanifested eternal combination of the three modes is the cause of the manifest state and is called pradhana. It is called prakriti when in the manifested stage of existence."
Yeah, you understand the distinction here? The unmanifested eternal combination of the three modes is the cause of the manifest state. So this pradhana is the potential creation, and then when it's manifest, like in the material world, it's called prakriti. So pradhana is like waiting in the wings, and then prakriti is manifest. So it's manifest, unmanifest, over and over again. This is why in the purport, Prabhupada compares the pradhan, or the unmanifest, to the mother. Sometimes she begets children, and sometimes not. Mother is always there, but sometimes with children, sometimes. Okay?
The aggregate elements, namely the 5 gross elements, the 5 subtle elements, the 4 internal senses, the 5 senses for gathering knowledge, and the 5 outward organs of action are known as the pradhana.
So these are the ingredients. Now Krishna's going to, Kapila is going to elaborate a little more. What are these defined as? Jay?
There are 5 gross elements, namely earth, water, fire, air, and ether. There are also 5 subtle elements: smell, taste, color, touch, and sound.
Okay, so let's stop for a moment here. Earth, water, air, fire, those are all very tangible. Ether, what does ether mean? Space, essentially, yeah. It's a space in between. Physics is going very enthusiastically into the study of dark matter. There's a sense that, there's a whole category of matter that we don't even see. And that there's actually the majority of matter in the universe. So as I understand it, this is ether. It's like radio waves travel from satellites or spaceships to Earth. What do they travel through? So there's no air. So they're traveling through some substance. So this is the subtlest of the 5 gross elements. Now these other subtle elements, we don't usually think of taste as an element. It's just something we have, right? We were born with it, we experience it, but at the same time, it is its own category of ingredients: taste, smell, color, touch, and sound. And later in the 3rd canto, there's an elaborate description of where these come from. They all actually originate from sound. So there are the senses, and then the objects of the senses are sometimes called. These are subtle elements. The object of the senses are subtle elements. All right, please go on.
The senses for acquiring knowledge and the organs for action, number 10, namely auditory sense, the sense of taste, the tactile sense, the sense of sight, the sense of smell, and the active organs for speaking, working, traveling, generating, and evacuating.
So let's give those their more English accent names, shall we? So we're all clear on those. What is the auditory sense? Okay, sense of taste comes from, right, by the tongue, yeah. Tactile sense, it's the skin, yeah. It's the biggest organ in the human body. It's the skin. And then the active organs for speaking, vocal cords, yeah, okay. Working, traveling, generating, genitals, and then evacuating, my bodies. All right. So yeah, these are 10 five knowledge acquiring. That is the tongue, the eyes, the ears, skin, nose, and the 5 active senses: the arms, the legs, the voice, the genitals, and the anus. Okay, we're up to 15 now. No, we're up to 20. Okay, what's next? Who's next?
The internal subtle senses are experienced as having 4 aspects in the shape of mind, intelligence, ego, and contaminated consciousness. Distinctions between them can be made only by different functions, since they represent different characteristics.
Could read this? I'll just read the purple one. Okay, sure. The 4 internal senses, or subtle senses, described herein are defined by different characteristics. When pure consciousness is polluted by material contamination, and when the identification with the body becomes prominent, one is said to be situated under false ego. Consciousness is the function of the soul, and therefore behind consciousness there is soul. Consciousness polluted by material contamination is called ahankar, or false ego. So we talked about the gross elements, the gross senses. Now these are the 4 subtle ones: mind, intelligence, ego, and then contaminated consciousness. These categorization of material elements vary slightly, but it's generally these 24. And the mind, intelligence, and false ego in the Gita are described as the subtle material elements. These are the elements that travel with the soul from body to body. So when we leave our gross body, the mind, intelligence, and false ego come along. And that way we determine our next birth. Yam yam vati smaram bhavam yanti kalevaram. Krishna says, whatever we think of at the time of death, we remember, and that we experience in our next life. We manifest in our next life. Also in the 15th chapter of the Gita, Krishna compares the subtle body to aromas being carried on the wind. When you smell something, it is just in kind of, you cannot grasp it, but it's there. So in the same way, the subtle body is covering the soul and carrying its conceptions of life into the next birth. So these are the last of the 24 material elements. So mind, intelligence, ego. So there are sciences associated with all of these. Very briefly, Earth is geology. You say electricity has to do with fire, etc. What is the science of mind? What is the science of intelligence? Philosophy. Political science. No. That's the science of false ego. Actually, what is the science of false ego? Pardon me? That is the manifestation of false ego, but we're talking about the different sciences associated with each element. What is the science of false ego? Psychiatry is in mind. Well, false ego is the point where the spiritual being identifies with the material body. What is that science? It's Krishna consciousness. That's what we're all about. What do we identify with the body, or do we identify with our spiritual reality? So it's the most subtle of all sciences. It's the tipping point for the living being. Do we live in spiritual consciousness or material consciousness? That depends on our understanding of all of the scientific explanations from Srimad Bhagavatam. All right. Any questions on this much? Need a few more texts.
All these are considered the qualified Brahman. The mixing elements, which is known as time, is counted as the 25th element.
So these were the 24 raw ingredients. Their composition and their manifestation as material nature is caused by time. So, okay. Go ahead.
The influence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is felt in the time factor, which causes fear of death due to the false ego of the deluded soul who has contacted material nature.
My dear mother, O daughter of Swayambhuva Manu, the time factor, as I have explained, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom the creation begins as a result of the agitation of the neutral, unmanifested nature.
By exhibiting his potencies, the Supreme Personality of Godhead adjusts all these different elements, keeping himself within as the Supersoul and without as time.
Sorry. Go ahead. 18, okay, so we're done. We are done. All right. If you know me, you know that I'm a big fan of open-ended questions. What is the quality of an open-ended question? Can't be answered yes or no. And what are the great advantages of open-ended questions? They reveal more, it gets people to talk. Yes, they're great for getting along with people, getting to know people. How do open-ended questions begin? What or how? All right. Yes. And why do we not use why questions in having conversations? It's pardon me? Invasive. Yes, exactly. Yes, it's intimidating. Why were you doing that? So it's very helpful to understand these principles of questions in terms of human relations. Has anyone read HG Kalakantha Prabhu's new book? He'll be seeing it, I'm sure. The 4 questions. Do you have it?
Not yet, I have it.
Yeah. Oh, it's so nice. He says, among punctuation marks, the question mark is like a hook. So it's pulling out information or attracting attention. So in terms of human interaction, open-ended questions are best. What or how questions are good, why questions are not so good. But in terms of understanding the universe, it's just the opposite. In the Aristotelian materialistic analysis of creation, it's all what or how. What's going on, like gravity, gravity drawing people in, drawing in the planets, keeping everything in its orbit. That's what's happening. How did it happen? According to science, it all came from a Big Bang. Big Bang asserts that all of the matter in the universe, when compressed, is about the size of a grapefruit. And that, as crazy as that seems, it's because if you took away all the space between the electrons and the neutrons, components of the atom, and just consolidated the little pieces, that would be all the matter. It's mostly the empty space filling it up. So that's the how, according to science. But they never ask why. Never ask why is it creation. It just happened. We're going to find out what happened. We'll tell you how it happened. But why it happened, that's a question we don't bother with. So Srimad Bhagavatam starts with that. Why is the material creation there? And why is it here? Because somebody wanted it. Yes, exactly. They never. They debate about, okay, is there a God or not? You know, some scientists believe yes, some people believe no, but that's a secondary point. They cannot really understand God's role in the whole thing unless they understand the why. And the why is explained in chapter 15 of the Bhagavad Gita, that aside from this gross material energy, there is a subtle living being. And the subtle living being, by his desires, is creating the material manifestation. I love this part about Krishna consciousness, that my Judeo-Christian upbringing taught me about this very ferocious God, very, to be feared, to be obeyed, or else. Like the last verse of the Old Testament, lest I smite the earth with a curse, is God speaking, or else you better obey. So this notion of God is very fearsome. But when we understand God in a more complete way, we see he's a very benevolent, neutral person. He's not imposing, he's not threatening, he's just fulfilling our desires. Eko bahunam yovidhati kamanam. Amongst many conscious living beings, there's one chief. And the one chief's business is fulfilling the desires of all the other ones. So God is fulfilling our desires, although it may not seem like that sometimes, right? If we really want something, and then God doesn't give it to us, and we wonder what kind of Amazon does he run? Anyone ever heard Akendra Prabhu's song? Akendra? Some of you know Akendra, that he's a devotee musician, philosopher. So he sings, Om, give me this, Om, give me that, and the other thing too while you're at it. Deliver it overnight, if you please. I'm doing my part here on my knees. Prime evil. Yes, the prime evil Lord. Although God doesn't serve as our material order supplier, in the broader sense, he does fulfill our desires. So we're eternal servants of God, with God in the spiritual world. And then this notion just crosses our mind. It's not really that inimical in a sense, envious. It's just like, wow, it's so fun being with Krishna. I wonder what it's like to be Krishna. So because that inquisitive desire arises, therefore we come to Gainesville. We find ourselves in the material world to find out what it's like to be the center of everything. Isn't that how we all go around in life? We all think everything revolves around me. Everyone sees things according to the way I see them. What's wrong with you people? This is the fulfillment of our desire to be at the center of things. But it's not really our position. It's just fulfilling that desire. Yedam dharyate jagat. This material creation only happens because people want to come and enjoy it. Or the jivas want to come and enjoy it. The full creation of God, as explained in the Bhagavatam, is the far greater part of it is the spiritual world where everybody is engaged in their constitutional position of serving. But one little corner where the curious souls want to experience artificial godhood, that's the material creation. So that little detour into material creation goes on and on as long as we still maintain that desire. And this is why Krishna consciousness is the science of false ego. And we come to the point in our spirit, in our evolution, where we realize this isn't working. I'm trying to be the center, but it just hasn't panned out the way I had hoped. People don't recognize my abilities. People don't appreciate me. I keep getting frustrated in my desires. And even if I'm highly successful in my life, I lose everything at death. And this just makes no sense. So it is only the desires of the material, of the living entities that cause the unmanifest elements to manifest. And As soon as we give up that desire, then we can return to our original position. So we're studying material nature here in Srimad Bhagavatam. As I mentioned, this is rather technical stuff. It can be kind of boring to understand, and like I used to think about different maths classes I would take. Am I ever going to use this? What is the relevance of this? Why am I wasting my time with this? So we have chapters and chapters devoted to how and why creation exists in Srimad Bhagavatam. My biblical upbringing, it was like, in the beginning, God created the earth. Took him 6 days, and then he took a day off on Sunday. No explanation about why, just how it happened. You see, so all of these details are there because it gives us the foundation for pursuing this subtle spiritual science of Krishna consciousness. We understand what happened, how it happened, and also why it happened, and why it keeps happening. So then it becomes relevant. Do I really want to be part of this particular exercise of wanting to enjoy and then exploiting the elements of material nature, then getting frustrated and then doing it all over again? Or do I want to back out? So this brings us to the other aspect of the material creation. Who is the first living being in the material creation? Brahma. And then what did Brahma learn about why he was there? He was pondering, what am I doing? What's going on? And then he heard 2 syllables, tapa, which means what? Austerity. So that is the why of the material world. It's meant for austerity. It's meant for helping the living beings pull out of the mad rush to be the center of everything. And that means austerity. So austerities are a very unpleasant term. It's a term that you rarely hear in modern society, except sometimes in economic forecasts. We're going to be on an austerity budget for a while. But that isn't the actual meaning. Austerity is not involuntary, it's voluntary. Voluntarily accepting some modest suffering for the sake of mitigating a tremendous amount of future suffering. So the austerity for us is described in chapter 18 of the Gita, the threefold austerity, body, mind, and speech. So what is the austerity of the body? Anyone remember some of those? Fasting is not mentioned specifically. To be clean? Pardon me? That also is not specifically mentioned, although it is one. Yeah, that's so austerity of the body consists in, let's see, in vowing, cleanliness, celibacy. I think those 3 are mentioned. Okay, and then and showing respect to anyway. Okay, austerity of the body, austerity of the mind is what? Satisfaction. Gravity. Gravity means to be content with what is there, to not be wanting to be hankering to change something or lamenting about something that's happened. Just being content with the moment, with the reality. That is the austerity of the mind, mode of goodness. And then the austerity of speech, Shamala. Truthfulness, yes. Beauty of truthfulness is you never have to remember what you said, right? Just always tell the truth. Truthfulness, austerity of speech also means avoiding speech that offends. And one more? Beneficially. Beneficially, truthfully, and avoiding speech that offends. So these threefold austerities are in the mode of goodness. And they're not the austerity of doing extreme fasts or Ironman. I got friend Rasaraj was telling me he did the Ironman triathlon. You know what? Isn't that crazy? 2.5 miles of swimming, followed by 120 miles of cycling, followed by a 26-mile run in one day, 12 hours. Can you imagine? That is an austerity that is for other people. But the point of austerity is really just getting out of the consciousness that everything is meant for my enjoyment, everything is meant for my pleasure, I and mine. And that is accomplished automatically by the practice of bhakti. Why? Because instead of thinking I'm the center, we think, oh, Krishna is the center. Let me, instead of eating, let me offer my food to Krishna. Instead of hearing and chanting about something mundane, let me hear and chant about Krishna's pastimes. Instead of trying to make other people happy, let me try to make Krishna happy. Because if Krishna is happy, everyone will be happy. Srila Prabhupada was talking to a Mayavadi, a personalist, and said, can you water every leaf on this tree? Can you do it? He said, no, I couldn't do that. He said, and even if you did, what would happen? The tree would still be dry. So pouring the water on the root, all the parts are nourished and watered. So this is the austerity of bhakti. It's not austerity in the Ironman triathlon sense. It's austerity of the mind, speech, and body. And with some simple regulations, one can live this austere life very nicely and navigate this world. I mean, we have no problem with eating, right? We're eating very nicely, except today. And we don't have any problem maintaining our health. Generally speaking, health is first priority. Keeping the body fit and functional. Can't neglect that. Krishna consciousness. What we do neglect, however, are the unnecessary emoluments of the body. What we do neglect are the unnecessary recognition of the false ego, like is it dhan pratisht, subtle sex desire, which is manifested in wanting money and prestige and recognition. We can do without those things. We can live a humble life. We can live under the radar. We can live on fumes very simply if we need to. That's the beauty of living in the ashram. We learn how to live, how simply one can actually live. I remember when John Lennon was introduced to Srila Prabhupada, I remember reading this in the, what was that called? That little book, Chant and Be Happy. Yeah, so John met Prabhupada and with his wife and Yoko Ono, and Prabhupada was just sitting in the servants' quarters behind his typical low desk, sitting on the floor. And afterwards, Yoko said to John, could you live that simply? You're living in a big mansion. He said, could you live that simply? Good question. So we learn in the ashram that yes, we can live that simply. This is the austerity, simple austerity required, nothing too ornate, too elaborate, too demanding. But at the same time, it's required. Tapo divyam putra kayena sattvam. In the 5th canto, Lord Rishabhdev says that one should perform divine austerity. Divine austerity. That just simply means working to please Krishna. Yagnartat karmanonya lokoyam karma bandhana. Everything should be done for Krishna, and then it's yajna, then it's austerity, then it's sacrifice. That allows us to live happily in this world. So this is the reason why we get this background about material nature. Just to understand what's happening, how to interact with it, and why it's there in the first place. Any questions? Yes, Prabhu. Reflections, comments too. Oh, one. You have to bring your own luck, yes.
So when you were talking that it open-ended question of what and how, right? And why is not supposed to be used, but in a spiritual sense, why is a more important question. And I remember one devotee once said that when a child asks the mother why the sky is blue, the answer is given, well, because the light breaks in a certain way. So the actual question to why is answered by how. So nobody's given why, because somebody wants it ultimately, but the response is based on how it happens. And then the Buddha said that that's how most of the inquisitive childish nature of why are answered. And ultimately, child is taught not to ask the why question anymore in his life. So he's only looking for how and what, and he no longer questions life after that, because he's been taught that those questions are not scientific,
And
even by his own parents.
Very interesting. Follow that. In other words, the child asks why, and the parents answer with how. And therefore, the child's proclivity to question things is squelched. Two things, if I may say. I have a 3-year-old grandson, a precocious little tyke, and he is in this stage of development where everything is why. Everything you say is why. Everything. There is nonstop. It's time to go to bed. Why? Let's go to the store. Why? So sometimes just to exercise my patience, I answer every question. And they never stop. They never stop. They never stop asking why. Why? Yeah, there's one story. This little boy was asking his father, why is the sky blue? I don't know. Why do I have to go to school? Well, you have to learn things. Why is the moon orbiting? I don't know. Why is the sun rising? I don't know. Do you get tired of me asking so many questions? No, if you don't ask questions, you won't learn anything. So anyway, yeah, this is a very good point. The why is squelched. We're never encouraged. Were we ever encouraged in school to ask, like, what is the purpose of life? Did you ever encounter that? Have you encountered that yet? No. Mm. What is that? Philosophy, that's right. Philosophy, the science of life. That's right.
10th grade.
Oh.
10th grade, we asked,
In 10th grade, you had a physics teacher who asked that question.
Why? She asked us why is the sky, orange or red, whatever, sunsets, and we're giving that explanation because there's refraction, the light bends a certain way, and it turns to that spectrum and so on. And she kept saying, no, that's not the answer. And then we were like, well, that's it. I mean, what else is there? She said, you are all explaining how, but why. And then she said that, well, that's a question of philosophy. And we were all like, get out of here. We explained it. So it was our physics teacher. So in India, the teachers have some sense of, and then she said it's philosophy. She said because God wants it that way. She said that. So
interesting. There was a professor, history professor at UF who retired and wrote a book lamenting the extraction of spiritual studies from academia. The university auditorium over here where we serve Krishna lunch, the big bell tower, that was a church. All universities were built around churches. And that was an integral part of the curriculum. But now he was saying it's sterilized. That's something we do outside of the academic parameter. And the result of that is that you can graduate, you can be a valedictorian, you can be highly successful. As long as you got money, you're a gentleman or a gentlelady and a scholar. Your character does not matter. All right, you had a question?
Yeah, that sounds like symptomatic of Kali Yuga. Yeah, that sounds symptomatic of Kali Yuga, where the total inversion of values, where it's not what you did to get to the money, it's the money at the end of the road. That's what matters. Oh, he has 5 million in the bank. That in itself has become a virtue.
That's a virtue, yes. Justice, it says in the 12th canto, will be available for those who can afford it. Healthcare in this country is available for those who can afford it more and more.
And I wanted to make another comment.
Please go ahead.
Philosophy, I had never heard of it described as the science of life, but I know etymologically it is the love of Sophia,
who was the Gnostic goddess of wisdom.
Hmm.
So it's more, yeah, it's more
So
that route.
the love of wisdom, the love. Yeah. Very nice. Okay. Yes, that's Vedanta would be the Sanskrit equivalent, more or less. And the bhakti is what gives it life. Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you for class. I had a question on my mind for a bit. You were saying earlier, like, some people may think Krishna consciousness is like esoteric if they don't have like the philosophical foundations and backing. And then I've also unfortunately encountered people that are pretty critical of ISKCON and Krishna consciousness, with pretty negative, energy. And so how do I deal with such persons?
If people are critical of the organization that's built around Srimad Bhagavatam, Prabhupada's teachings, can just refer them to the 5th canto about the hellish planets. We all bring our respective conditioning to bhakti. And so, just I'm going to speak subjectively here over the last few decades. I have observed that some people just can work well in an organization. Some people can't. Some people, plays well with other children. It's probably on their report card. And others not. So working in an organization means that we have to appreciate and cooperate with the values of others. Who was there for Yadunath Prabhu's presentation in Vrindavan? Do you remember the Krishna House retreat? Remember him, the stand-up comedian? He talked about improv and team building. So comedians who do improv have a real strong ethic about working together. They have to. They have to. Whatever the other one brings up, their comrade just builds on that. So the principle he enunciated was 2 words. Anyone remember? Yes? Yes? Yes, and. Yes, and. Generally, in the ego-driven material world, we say yes, but. And yet, and as soon as we say but, it negates everything that's been said before. So in improv, you learn always, whatever they say, yes, and then you build on it. So to work in a cooperative way requires a yes, and attitude. But I respect your contribution, however stupid. No, I don't allow myself to just negate what you said because it doesn't happen to fit my conception. Some people can't do that. And so as a result, people will find fault and criticize. Ben Franklin said that any fool can criticize, complain, and condemn, and most fools do. But it doesn't take much intelligence to find fault. It takes intelligence to find the good. Like Chanakya Pandit's definition of a gentleman, remember? Or a learned person. A learned person can take out gold from filthy place. A learned person can take good instruction even from an unqualified teacher. And a learned person can essentially take the best of everything. That's the point. So this is the reason why there's dissension. So when we hear criticism of ISKCON, we have to understand that this person is probably expressing their own pain and frustration. Therefore, in one sense, we can be sympathetic, but if we listen to it, then we are participating in the offense. Or that applies both collectively and individually. You ever experience that? Somebody pulls you aside, say such and such person is doing this and doing this, and so they want to pull you in their criticism. So a devotee then has, well, we have 3 choices according to Nectar of Devotion, right? Which we can remove that person's tongue surgically. That is not recommended option. Then we can defeat by superior argument, or we can leave. So if we're hearing criticism, we have to speak up positively, or we have to leave. So speaking up positively just means to counter negative with positive. I see. So you feel ISKCON is this or that. I found a lot of benefit from ISKCON in this way. So yes, and. Yes, ISKCON is an aggregate of human beings, and human beings have fallen. And I have found tremendous benefit, wonderful people in ISKCON. I was speaking with a critic recently who was saying, well, people get initiated in ISKCON and then they leave. And he was speaking more about contemporary states of affairs. And I said, well, how many of Srila Prabhupada's disciples left? I can tell you the answer. It's about 80%. I don't think they left practicing Krishna consciousness in that number, but as far as participating in ISKCON, even as congregational members, great majority. There's reasons for that, which we're trying to correct in Krishna House, mostly because it was too fanatic in the early days, and people felt it was all or nothing, and all right, well, it's nothing. But in fact, if we can just grow ISKCON in a more benevolent way, being the educational institution it's meant to be, then it can meet people's needs more easily. Expectations will be less. All right, anything else?
Just real
Real quick, we don't have breakfast this morning, so we can pontificate a little longer. Oh, we do have breakfast. Okay, I'm sorry for those. Beg your pardon.
On a word of tapa that is translated as austerity, for the sake of communication, can we also interuse or interchangeably use word discipline instead, just for the sake of communication?
Good idea. Yeah, that resonates a little better than austerity. People know that by discipline they can improve themselves. And last word from Shamala.
I was thinking how mind-boggling it is to imagine that there are unlimited living entities, and therefore there continues to be a need for this little corner where we have, people, like you said, the place where they want to have a god. What was that? They want to experience artificial godhood. I like that expression. So it's just, sometimes I struggle with that mind-boggling aspect of it. Like, how come we can't just liberate everyone and then be done with that? Like, close the doors on that.
Close the factory. Well, it's explained in the 8th chapter of the Gita. It's manifest and then unmanifest, again and again. So the living entities go about their business, and then when the creation is withdrawn, they're in the state of limbo, right? What is the night of Lord Brahma, another huge period of time, and then again they do. So you remember Vasudeva Datta, Chaitanya Charitamrita. He was a great devotee who prayed to Krishna that please let me suffer all of the karma of all the living entities in the universe so they can all be liberated. I will accept all of their suffering. Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj said that he disclosed he was making this prayer. Right? Yeah. So Vasudeva Datta's prayer touched Lord Chaitanya so much that he said, yes, by your strong desire, all the karma of all the living entities in the universe is now removed, and they are all liberated, and you are also liberated. So everyone who lived at the time of Lord Chaitanya was liberated, and then filled right back up. Right, just like a ride at Disneyland. Huh? It lines up, they get on, and they get off, and it fills right up again. So we can do our part to liberate the universe, even if we're not Vasudeva Datta. We can liberate one or two. That would be nice. All right, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Material creation ki jai. Prasade Govinde Namo Brahmani Vaishnave Swami Rajan Prasad Vijay. Persons develop faith in God, spiritual goodness, Lord, the deity of Govinda, Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the transcendental Krishna Nam and Vaishnava.